Welcome, welcome, folks. It is finally Friday. Are you excited? The weekend is finally here. Here we are on Hurricane Hub Live, and it is July the 11th. Thankfully, still quite quiet in the Atlantic Basin as well as the Eastern Pacific. But we've got some cool things to talk about tonight on HHL as we wrap up the work week. We're going to take a look at hurricane return periods. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, this is going to be the period of time that passes in between. We'll start off with hurricanes, and then we'll go through major hurricanes of when they return making landfall to a specific area or within 50 miles of that point. This is a product that's put out from the National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, and it's just a compilation of data since it's been compiled, really. So here's a look at any hurricane category, okay, with winds at least 74 miles per hour or greater, so at least a Cat 1. So the average number of years between hurricanes making landfall within 50 miles of any point here. Now, I want to kind of hone in on areas that see the most impacts, right? The Gulf Coast, the southeast coast of the U.S., and up into the mid-Atlantic. Let's start on the Gulf Coast. So we're looking at return periods here in the Houston-Galveston area between 9 and 11 years. So that's usually the typical span of time from a landfalling hurricane in and around there within 50 miles. So about a decade, okay? You get closer to like New Orleans, just south of there, Plaquemines Parish, 7 years. So that's a pretty short amount of time. And as we know, that's been much less than that. This is just an average. You get up in the Big Bend region, which is unusual because it's been a hot spot the last several hurricane seasons. You know, kind of started off with Michael, and then we had Sally in the same general area out near Pensacola. And, of course, last year, Helene and then Milton. And then you get down to the Florida Gulf Coast, the west coast of Florida here, and you're getting between 8, 9, 10 years between landfalls. And then South Florida, especially on the east side, the southeast coast, 5, 6, 7 years. So, of course, this is actually the area of the country that has seen the most hurricane landfalls in this general area here, of course, with Florida, South Florida, just sticking out in a hurricane alley pretty much. And then you get the southeast coast, but unusual here from Cape Canaveral up to Jacksonville. You see kind of some green showing up here that has a larger length of time between hurricane landfalls there, between 12, 13 years. You go along the bend of the southeast coast, South Carolina and Georgia coastline, goes up a little bit. But then, of course, you get North Carolina that juts out a little bit, right? Especially the Outer Banks. That's down to 5 years. In fact, you look at the entire area, the Outer Banks sees the shortest window of time between landfalling hurricanes. Only 5 years, right over here near Hatteras Island. It's farthest out to the east, and when we get these storms that come up and they loop out, they usually do impact and sometimes make landfall right over that part of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And then a sheltered area, the bay of the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, when you start to see those numbers go up between a decade and a half. Let's switch over now to major hurricanes, okay? Category 3 or greater with winds of 110 miles per hour or more. And we see generally the same amount of, same instances. The timing is obviously much longer duration. Like we're up to a quarter century here between major hurricane landfalls in the Houston-Galveston area. About 2 decades as you get out towards South Louisiana. And then South Florida is between 14 and 20 years time. And then you get up to the Outer Banks, and we're about at 16 years between major hurricane landfalls in that area. Now, what about up to the north? Obviously, landfalls are much, much less frequent there and very rare. You get up to the coast of Maine, and you're talking hundreds of years for the return period for major hurricanes. Big, obvious reason for that is because you get colder waters as you get farther north and gain latitude, and typically major hurricanes don't sustain themselves or remain as intense if they're heading due north and tracking towards the coast of Maine here. And a lot of times they're transitioning over to extratropical cyclones and gaining size and strength there. So likely at that point in time, never really considered as major hurricanes, but they do happen. Especially in southern New England, Jersey coast. You look back to Superstorm Sandy. Wasn't a major hurricane, but certainly caused a lot of damage. It did impact that part of the world. And then you got Long Island there that juts out, and then looking at a 50-year return period for a major hurricane. That's the highest in all of that area in southern New England and parts of the Northeast. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to kind of look at here and just kind of gauge our return periods in terms of hurricanes and major hurricanes in those hurricane-prone areas across the United States. All right, we're at the 11th of July. We're about 6 weeks now into hurricane season. And so far, I mean, with the exception of our 3 named storms, Andrea, that was in the subtropics, that was a nothing burger, stayed out of our open water for 12 hours. It was a named system. Then we had Barry, that was in the Bay of Campeche, the southern Gulf, that did make landfall in Mexico, barely a tropical storm, that was heavily sheared. And then, of course, we had last weekend, Chantal, that made landfall in South Carolina. It was the strongest of the 3 with max winds at 50 miles per hour. So middle grade tropical storm, need 39 mile per hour winds or greater to become a tropical storm. And that made landfall, caused a lot of flooding in North Carolina as it lifted north. And as we do see with decaying tropical systems along the eastern seaboard, they do tend to cause that. But we're not seeing much in the way of any uptick anytime soon, but in climatology, you usually start to see a little bit of an uptick as we get towards the later part of July, and certainly by August, mid-August, certainly we see a big increase in activity, hiking it all the way up to the peak of the season right around September the 10th, and then slowly backing down as we get through October, and then, of course, the wrap up in November. Out in the basin right now, very benign looking, lack of any convection or any activity at all in general. I do want to focus on the Saharan dust because we still have plenty of it, although the plumes themselves not as intense. This one is widespread, but you can see the lesser amounts of lesser dust concentration farther to the south, where we may see some typical development here in the main development region. A little break, and then we've got another pretty extensive plume exiting off the coast of Africa. That looks to be at a higher latitude this go around. We are starting to see tropical waves emerge off the African coastline. This one here that looks pretty robust even in the first couple frames of the satellite imagery here, but you can see it's really just kind of getting, ripped apart and destroyed with the drier air, and overall just not a favorable environment. We don't have a lot of lift. In fact, we've got a lot of sinking out there, and that's just compressing and destroying any storms from really developing. I do want to show an interesting example here because we talked about the Colorado State University seasonal outlook that was revised downward. So they do revisions throughout the season. The next one's going to come out in August, but they revised down their storm count by 1 storm, by 1 hurricane, and by 1 major hurricane. Okay, not a huge revision down, but a big citing factor was the presence, the observation of increased amounts of wind shear in the Caribbean. And an excellent example here. We've got a tropical wave that you can see here starting on off, has a flare-up of convection, but we have very strong westerly wind shear, southwesterly wind shear, and you can see that streaming off and blowing off all the convection, displacing it off towards the east and northeast there. So these waves don't even stand a chance, and then they just get pretty much just robbed of all of their energy as they try to drive their way off to the west. So a lot of wind shear present, and that's a big reason why also we call the Caribbean this time of the year as the graveyard of the Atlantic Basin. Anything that may develop in the main development region hits the Caribbean, encounters that increased wind shear, and falls apart pretty fast. Now I want to end things here in the northern Gulf because this is the area that Climate Prediction Center says there may be a slight opportunity for some development here. Low chance, and that's 20% risk. Each day that goes forward, this is getting a little bit more outdated because it's only updated once a week, and it was updated 2 days ago. So we'll get another update next week, but this is for the time frame of next week, 16th through the 22nd, highlighting the northern Gulf. After that, we go to the end of the month, and there's pretty much nothing expected. We'll see what next week's update shows here, but as of right now, model's not even sniffing out anything at all in the basin. But I want to show you the GFS model here. This is what we've been visiting the past couple of nights and looking at atmospheric spin or relative vorticity, playing it out through that window of opportunity possibility, July 16th through the 22nd. Here we are on the 16th, so middle of next week, Wednesday. We're getting a little bit of signature here of at least some stretched out spin in the atmosphere. We need to see this get a little bit more consolidated and circular, a little bit stretched out and doesn't stay over water for long, exits from the northeast Gulf and slides inland and rains itself out. Likely a cluster, probably, of some thunderstorm activity, heavy rainfall, that sort of thing, but the probability of it becoming a tropical system or a named tropical storm looks to be quite low, but may be some area to just focus on here as we go into next week. Out in the eastern Pacific, we've talked about this all week. We've had no activity out here this week, which is unusual because it's been so active. Started May the 15th, the hurricane season in the eastern Pacific starts 2 weeks earlier because it seems to get a little bit more favorable there. Conditions just overall a little more conducive earlier on, and it doesn't take as long to get ready to go like it does in the Atlantic Basin. But regardless of that, still some flare-ups here, some tropical waves, but nothing that's looked at as an area of interest from the National Hurricane Center for potential development here. Managed to squeeze out 6 named storms, 3 hurricanes already in the eastern Pacific, 2 majors. And the last 2 are majors, Flossie and Eric, Category 3 and Category 4 storms. Eric did make landfall in Mexico and caused quite a stir there near Acapulco with lots of flooding there. All right, let's get to yesterday's trivia question. So I asked you what scale is used to gauge the intensity of tropical systems. Is it the Fujiwara scale? No, it's not that. Fujiwara is not even a scale, but it is an effect. Fujiwara effect is when two storm systems get close enough in proximity that they start to influence each other. And they actually do a little bit of a dance. They rotate around one another, and eventually the stronger of the two will begin to almost envelop the other one and steal part of that energy. Now, a lot of times when we talk about this, because it happens, the Fujiwara effect, and people will say, oh my gosh, can these two just combine and become a superstorm? Not the case. One storm will weaken and share some of its energy with the other one, and you'll just have one storm after all. It won't be a superstorm. How about the enhanced Fujita scale? Nope, that's the EF scale that we use for tornadoes. Richter scale is for the strength of earthquakes. So the answer here is a Saffir-Simpson scale, and this is what we use to gauge the intensity of hurricanes based on wind speed. Okay, category 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. 3 and up is considered a major hurricane. And when you get north of 157 miles per hour, which we've had a lot of, you get a category 5 storm that causes a whole ton of damage. So here's a look at some of the damage possible. We've got minimal damage at Cat 1, extensive damage at Cat 2, major damage at Cat 3, and of course severe damage and catastrophic damage getting up to category 4 and 5. When you see those winds that strong, not only do you have the strong surge, the high surge, but the wind speed overall will just blow roofs off and just destroy structures that are not properly maintained or prepared for a storm of that magnitude. All right, let's get to today's question now. In an average year, how many hurricanes form in the Atlantic? Remember, this year, we're calling for a slightly above normal Atlantic hurricane season. So I want to know, in a normal season, how many hurricanes do we see out there? Is it 4, 5, 6, or 7? We'll have the answer on Monday on HHL. Hey, in the meantime, we've got a cool little hurricane guide if you want to download that. You can scan the QR code to download the 13 News Now Hurricane Guide. Has information on supplies you should have on hand, emergency numbers you might need, and a whole lot more. You can download it for free just by scanning that QR code. Also, I just want to remind you, make sure to join us here, right here, Monday through Friday for Hurricane Hub Live at 8 p.m. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday at 8 o'clock.